I didn't flinch. I didn't even set down my champagne flute. The notification lit up my screen face up on the linen tablecloth, and I read it 3 times before I let myself believe what I was seeing. Effective today, your position as head of strategy is terminated. Security will collect your access cards Monday. Consider this my anniversary gift to the family. Don't make it a scene. It was signed by my brother-in-law, sent from his personal phone, at 7:43 p.m. on a Saturday, while I sat at the head of a table he had been seated at because of me. Across from me, my husband saw my face change. He's been my husband for 10 years that night. He knows my face the way you know a song you've sung since childhood. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just nudged his foot against mine under the table, the way he does when he wants me to know he's right there, and waited. I turned the phone toward him. He read it again. Then he laughed. Not loud, just a small, dry sound in the back of his throat. The kind of laugh you make when somebody trips over a curb they could have seen coming if they had looked up. He picked up his bourbon, took a sip, set it down and said, "Sweetheart, are you going to tell him, or am I?" I said, "Let's eat first. The kitchen worked hard on this. That is how I want you to picture me at the start of the story. Sitting at a private anniversary dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant my husband had booked out for 50 people, wearing a champagne-colored dress that took 3 fittings, looking across a table at the man I'd built a life with, while my own brother-in-law thought he had just ended my career via text message. He had not. He had ended his own. He just didn't know it yet. My name doesn't matter for this story, but for the sake of telling it, you can call me Imogen. I was 33 years old. I had a daughter named Annika who was 4 and was at home with my mother because we wanted one night. Just one. That was about the 2 of us. I worked, on paper, as head of strategy at a logistics firm called Halberton Freight. On paper, I made a comfortable salary. On paper, I drove a sensible car and lived in a sensible house in a sensible neighborhood outside Charlotte. On paper, I was the kind of woman my sister had been calling cute and trying so hard since we were teenagers. On paper. Off paper, I owned 61% of Halberton Freight. I had since I was 28. I had built the algorithm that routed 340,000 trucks across the eastern seaboard every single day. I had taken a regional shipping company my late father-in-law had run out of a warehouse in Greensboro and turned it into the 3rd largest privately held logistics firm in the country. The CEO, whose name was on the door, a man we called Uncle Rune for reasons of marriage, was my husband's uncle and a very good friend, and he had been begging me for 2 years to come public with my ownership stake. I had refused. I had wanted, more than anything, to know who in my own life was loyal to me and who was loyal to what they thought I could do for them. Now I knew. My sister, who you can call her by what I called her growing up, which was Sissy, had married a man I'll call brother-in-law because I no longer enjoy saying his name out loud. Brother-in-law had been hired 3 years ago at Halberton as a mid-level operations manager. He had been hired because Sissy cried at Thanksgiving and said her husband couldn't find work and her marriage was suffering and didn't I have any pull. I had quietly asked Uncle Rune to find him something. 3 years later, through what I now understood was a careful and patient campaign of meetings I wasn't invited to, golf weekends I wasn't told about, and a friendship with the head of HR that I now realized had not been an accident. Brother-in-law had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer. 6 weeks ago, he had been given the temporary title of Acting Chief Executive, while Uncle Rune took medical leave for a hip replacement. I had personally signed off on that arrangement. I had thought, in my generosity, that it would be a good experience for him. I had thought, in my stupidity, that he would use those 6 weeks to prove himself worthy of a smaller, permanent leadership role. He had used those 6 weeks to try to fire me. Sissy was sitting 4 seats down on my side of the table. She was wearing a dress I had bought her for her birthday and a necklace I had given her at Christmas. She had glanced at her husband when my phone lit up. I had seen it. I hadn't understood it at the time. I understood it at the time. I understood it now. She had known. She had probably helped him write it. I imagined the 2 of them that morning in the kitchen of the house we had helped them buy the down payment for, drafting the language together, deciding when to send it, deciding it would land best in front of 50 people who had come to celebrate my marriage. I am not somebody who cries easily. I cried twice as a child, once when my dog died, and once when my father told me he was leaving my mother. I cried at my wedding. I cried when Annika was born. That is the list. I did not cry at that table, but something in me went very, very quiet, the way a house goes quiet right before a storm hits, when the birds stop and the air gets heavy, and you know in your body that something is coming. The first course arrived. Beet salad with goat cheese and pistachios. My husband, whose name I'll just give you because it's the most important name in my life and he deserves it. My husband Beck lifted his fork and said, low enough only I could hear, "How do you want to play this?" I said, "Let him think it worked, for now." He nodded. He always nods when I tell him I have a plan. He has watched me build something from nothing twice in our lives together. Once with a small consulting business I sold at 26, once with Halberton, and he has long since stopped questioning my timing. He just nodded and ate his salad and made small talk with my mother-in-law across the table about her trip to Savannah. I want to tell you about my husband for 1 minute because he matters to the story in a way that might surprise you. Beck is not flashy. He drives a truck. He teaches high school history. He has calluses on his hands because he restores old furniture in our garage on weekends. He has never, in 10 years, asked me for a thing. When I told him the night before I signed the papers to buy out his uncle's company that I was about to spend everything we had and most of what we could borrow on a logistics firm I'd researched in secret for 18 months, he poured us both a glass of wine and said, "If you say it's going to work, then it's going to work, and if it doesn't, we'll figure out the next one." That was it. That was the whole conversation. We have been married 10 years and he is the only person in my life who has never, not once, made me feel like I had to be smaller than I was for him to feel bigger. Brother-in-law was the opposite of Beck in every way you can be opposite. He talked about himself in the third person. He used the word leverage in casual conversation. He had once, at a family barbecue, explained the concept of supply and demand to me, while I held a glass of wine I had purchased from a vineyard I partially owned. He was the kind of man who corrects waitresses about the wine they recommend. He was the kind of man who told my husband at our wedding that he hoped Beck knew what he was getting into with the high achiever sister. He was, I think, the most fragile man I have ever met. And like all fragile men, he had spent his marriage to my sister convincing her that her family had not given her enough, that I in particular had not given her enough, and that he was the one who was finally going to get what was owed. The dinner went on. Second course came. Lamb for some, halibut for others. Toast started. My father, who flew in from Tucson, stood up and made a speech about how marriages like mine and Beck's are rare, and how he had known the day Beck walked into our living room with his hat in his hand, that this was the kind of man you don't let your daughter let go of. He cried a little. My mother dabbed her eyes. My sister smiled in the way she has smiled at me since we were 8 years old, which is the smile of someone who has decided, long ago, that any kindness directed at me is kindness stolen from her. Then brother-in-law stood up. I want you to picture him, tall, blonde, going gray, wearing a navy suit he had bought specifically for that evening because Sissy had told him our family was the kind of people who notice clothes, holding a glass of champagne he had not paid for, about to give a toast at an anniversary dinner he had not been invited to as a speaker, in front of 50 people whose lives, in one way or another, my company had touched. He clinked his glass with a butter knife. Twice. Loud. I'd like to say a few words, he said, about my sister-in-law. Beck reached under the table and put his hand on my thigh. He did not look at me. He looked at brother-in-law with an expression of polite, faintly amused interest, the same expression he uses when his students try to argue their way out of a deadline. For those of you who don't know, brother-in-law said, I am the chief executive officer of Halberton Freight, and tonight I want to honor the woman who has been a strategic part of our company's growth, Sissy's older sister, my wife's older sister. My wife's older sister. He raised his glass. To Imogen, who has had a great run, and who is moving on tonight to her next chapter. There was a beat of confused silence. My mother looked at me. My father looked at my mother. My mother-in-law set down her fork very, very carefully. Brother-in-law smiled. Effective immediately, he said. I have relieved Imogen of her duties at Halberton. It was a hard decision. But the company is moving in a new direction, and we need leadership that reflects where we're going, not where we've been. I wanted to announce it here, tonight, in front of family, because Imogen deserves a proper send-off. To Imogen. He drank. Nobody else did. My sister was the only one at the table smiling. She had her chin lifted in that particular way. She lifts it when she's waiting for someone to notice she's beautiful. She had been waiting for this moment, I realized, for years. Maybe her whole life. The moment when I, the older sister, the one with the career, the one our father called when something needed handling, was finally cut down in front of everyone she wanted to impress. I let the silence sit. I let it get heavy. I let brother-in-law's smile start to flicker at the edges as he registered that nobody had echoed his toast, that the room had gone cold, that even Sissy was beginning to look around for a friendly face and not finding one. Then I stood up. I am not a tall woman. I am 5'4" in heels, but I have learned, over a decade of running rooms full of men twice my age, how to take up space without raising my voice. I lifted my glass. I looked around the table. I smiled, the small, real smile I save for moments I have been waiting for. "Thank you," I said, "for that lovely toast. I'd like to respond with one of my own if I may." Brother-in-law's mouth opened. He closed it again. 10 years ago tonight, I said, I married a man who has never, in a single conversation, asked me to be less than I am. That, in this world, is the rarest thing I have ever found, and I would not have what I have, in any part of my life, without him. I turned to Beck. He looked up at me with that face he has, the one he made at the altar, the one he made the first time he held our daughter. I love that face more than I love anything on this earth. "To my husband," I said, "and to the company we're about to talk about." I turned back to the table. "I'd like to introduce myself," I said, "to those of you who don't already know. My name is Imogen. I am the majority owner of Halberton Freight. I have been since I bought the company from my husband's uncle 6 years ago. I own 61% of the voting shares. The remaining 39% is held by 3 minority partners, all of whom you'll be meeting in the coming weeks because they will be helping me, as of midnight tonight, conduct a full internal review of every personnel decision made by the acting CEO during his 6-week tenure, including, of course, the one he just announced." Brother-in-law's face did something I have not, before or since, seen a human face do. It went through 3 colors. It started at the wine flush of confident drunkenness, passed through the gray of dawning comprehension, and arrived at the white of full physical shock. He set his glass down too hard. Champagne sloshed onto the tablecloth. I kept going. "For those of you who are family," I said, "I owe you an apology. I have kept this from you for 6 years. I had reasons. Some of them were practical. Some of them were, I think, less generous. I wanted to know, before I told anyone, who in this family was capable of loving me without knowing what I could do for them." I looked, for 1 second only, at my sister. Now I know. Sissy's face had gone very still. "To Beck," I said, raising my glass again. "Who has known the whole time, and who has for 10 years treated me exactly the same." My father stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stood up, lifted his glass, and looked at me with the face of a man who had just understood his daughter for the first time in 58 years. My mother stood up next, then Beck's parents. Then, one by one, around the table, every guest stood up. 50 people, on their feet, glasses raised, looking at me. Except brother-in-law, who was still sitting down, gripping the edge of the table. Except Sissy, who was crying, not the elegant kind, the ugly kind. The kind I had only seen on her once before, when she was 11 and our parents had taken away her phone for a week. I sat back down. I picked up my fork. I took a bite of halibut. It was excellent. Beck leaned over. "You okay?" he said, very quietly. I said, "I'm going to be. I want to tell you what happened next, because I know that's why you're still here. You want to know what happened to him. You want to know what happened to her. You want the part where the kingdom collapses. I'll give it to you. But I'll give it to you fast, because I have learned over the years that the moment of standing up is the only moment that matters. Everything after is just paperwork. That night, at 12:01 in the morning, three things happened simultaneously. My head of HR, a woman named Ondine who has worked with me since the consulting days, and whose loyalty I have never, in 15 years, had to question, sent a company-wide email announcing that brother-in-law's tenure as acting CEO had been terminated due to unauthorized personnel actions taken in conflict with the company's ownership structure. Uncle Rune, who was very much not on medical leave anymore, was reinstated as CEO with a co-executive structure that included me as chairwoman and chief strategy officer, a title I should have taken 5 years ago and didn't. And every single email brother-in-law had sent from his Halberton account over the past 6 weeks was archived, sealed, and turned over to outside counsel. That last part is the part that ended him. Because brother-in-law, in his 6 weeks of unsupervised power, had not just tried to fire me, he had also, it turned out, awarded 3 contracts to a vendor owned by a college friend of his. He had also, it turned out, given himself a 40% raise without board approval. He had also, it turned out, used the company card to take Sissy on a long weekend in Aspen that they had told the family was a gift from her work bonus. Sissy did not have a job. Sissy had not had a job since she dropped out of her master's program at 23. The bonus did not exist. Brother-in-law was not just fired, he was sued. The company recovered the misappropriated funds, the unauthorized raise, and the cost of the contracts. He settled out of court because he could not afford to lose. The settlement included a non-disclosure agreement that prevents him from working in logistics, transport, or supply chain in any executive capacity for 7 years. He is, last I checked, selling insurance in a strip mall in Greenville. Sissy. I want to talk about Sissy for a minute, because I know some of you are wondering. I am not in the business of destroying my sister. I never have been. The week after the dinner, she called me 41 times. I did not answer. She showed up at my house. I did not open the door. She left a voicemail, sobbing, telling me she was sorry. She had not known. She had not understood. She had been manipulated by him. I listened to it once. I did not believe her. Not because I have a cruel heart, because she had, 3 days before the dinner, sent me a text message telling me that the necklace I gave her at Christmas was too cheap to wear in public and asking when I was planning to get her something actually nice. I had not been planning to get her anything else, but I had read the text, and I had remembered it, and I had thought, with a cold little click in the back of my mind, that this was a person who had been waiting in some small private place inside herself to take from me whatever she could. I did not cut her off. I am not built for that. But I did, in the months that followed, stop calling her first. I stopped sending her checks when she texted that she was short on rent. I stopped when she was rude at family dinners, leaping in to fix the mood. I let her be uncomfortable. I let her experience, for the first time in our lives, what it felt like to be the sister who needed something. I think it has been hard for her. I think, in some ways, it has been good for her. I do not know yet. I am still waiting to see. My father called me 2 days after the dinner and asked me to forgive him. I asked him what for. He said for not seeing you, for all those years, for thinking your sister was the one I needed to worry about. I told him I had not been waiting for him to see me, but I was glad he had hid. We have lunch every other Sunday now when he is in town. He brings the wine. We don't talk about Sissy. Uncle Rune retired for real, 6 months later. He sent me a framed photograph of the original warehouse in Greensboro, the one his father had run a single truck out of in 1962. He wrote on the back, "From one builder to another. Thank you for being patient with an old man." It hangs in my office. I look at it most days. Beck. Beck is still Beck. He still teaches high school history. He still drives the same truck. He still restores old furniture in the garage on weekends. The only thing that changed after I went public was my ownership of the company is that he started getting invited to things he didn't want to go to and offered things by people who suddenly knew his name. he declined every single one. He came home one night, 3 months after the dinner, and said, "I'd like to take a sabbatical next year. I'd like us to go somewhere with Annika, somewhere with a beach, for the whole summer." We did. We went to a little island off the coast of South Carolina and rented a house with a porch, and Annika learned to swim, and Beck taught her the names of every kind of shell. I sat on the porch and read books and did not look at my phone for 10 weeks. It was the best summer of my life. Annika is 6 now. She does not know any of this story. One day, when she is old enough, I will tell her. I will tell her that the people who love you do not need to know what you can do for them. I will tell her that quiet is not the same as weak. I will tell her that the most powerful thing she will ever have is the ability to sit at a table, hear someone try to take everything from her and not flinch, to finish her dinner, to raise her glass when she is ready, and to stand up only when standing up will mean something. I will tell her what my husband told me the night after the dinner, when I sat on the edge of our bed and finally, for the first time in 24 hours, let myself feel everything I had been holding. He said, "You did not become powerful tonight. You just stopped hiding." I think about that often. I think about all the women I know who are hiding. Hiding their salaries, hiding their accomplishments, hiding their opinions, hiding the parts of themselves that someone somewhere along the way told them were too much. I think about my sister, hiding behind a husband who told her she was less than me. I think about brother-in-law, hiding behind a title that wasn't his. I think about the people in your life, right now, who are betting on you staying hidden. Stop hiding. That is the only thing I have to tell you. You don't have to make a scene. You don't have to slap anyone. You don't have to send an email at midnight or hire a lawyer or burn anything down. You just have to stand up when the moment comes and tell the truth about who you are. The world will rearrange itself around that. It always does. It rearranged itself around me at a table for 50 on the 10th anniversary of the best decision I ever made, in front of a man who thought he was firing me and a sister who thought she was finally winning. They were both wrong. I had been the one in charge the whole time. They just hadn't been paying attention, and honestly, that was on them. I think about that dinner often, not in the way you'd expect. Not with anger. Not even with satisfaction, really. I think about it the way you think about a door you almost walked through and didn't, because the truth is, if my brother-in-law had been smarter, if he had been patient, if he had spent those 6 weeks of acting power actually learning the business, instead of trying to use it against the one person who had given him a seat at the table, he might still be there. He might be running a division by now. He might have earned, slowly and honestly, the title he tried to steal in a single night. He chose the shortcut. Shortcuts, in my experience, always cost more than the long road. That is the first thing I learned, and the thing I try to teach my daughter Annika now, even though she is only 6 and mostly wants to talk about horses. What you do in the dark, when you think nobody is watching, is who you are. My brother-in-law thought nobody was watching. My sister Sissy thought nobody was counting. They were wrong on both counts. The world keeps a ledger, not in some mystical way, in a very ordinary way. The emails get archived, the contracts get reviewed, the people you mistreated, remember. The receipts pile up in a drawer somewhere, and one day somebody opens the drawer. The second thing I learned is that quiet is not the same as weak. For 6 years, I let people in my own family think I was the cute one, the trying one, the one who needed Sissy's life advice at Thanksgiving. I let them because I was paying attention. I wanted to know who I was actually surrounded by. I think a lot of women are told from the time we're small that to be loved we have to be small, that if we are too much, too smart, too capable, too successful, we will be alone. I believed that once. I don't anymore. The people who love you when you are small will resent you when you are large. The people who love you when you are large would have loved you when you were small. Beck loved me before I owned anything. That is the only reason I trusted him to love me after. The third thing, and this is the one I most want you to hear, is that grit is not loud. I did not become a different person at that table. I just stopped pretending to be a smaller one. Building something real takes years of choices. Nobody applauds. Nobody clapped for the 18 months I spent researching Halberton before I bought it. Nobody clapped for the 5 a.m. mornings, the partners I had to convince, the deals I had to walk away from. The applause came at the end, and the applause was the smallest part. The work was the part that mattered. The work is always the part that mattered. If you take one thing from my story, take this. Do the work. Do it quietly. Do it well. And when the day comes that someone underestimates you so badly that they hand you a moment, stand up. Not to humiliate them, just to tell the truth. The truth is enough.